Ever since its conception, Mario Kart has always been a massive success. Each entry was one of the best-selling games on their respective consoles, so you can see why the series was so popular even back then. However, even with the solid performances, Mario Kart still wasn't the big worldwide phenomenon we know it today. That was until Mario Kart DS, released for the Nintendo DS in 2005. This was when Mario Kart truly became one of the most popular franchises of all time. That's probably due to the fact it was on the DS, but even today, it's still considered by many to be one of, if not the best Mario Karts of all time, and it's easy to see why. It was the very first 3D portable Mario Kart game. It was the first to introduce retro tracks. It's the only one to have a mission mode, and it introduced online play. And then there were the tracks. I'll admit not all of the tracks are winners, but some of them are the most unbelievably memorable tracks of all time. So today, it's time to continue our quest and rank all of them, as well as a separate section for the battle tracks. So without further ado, let's go! 32, Baby Park. Remember this track from Double Dash? How it was super fun, fast-paced, and chaotic with tons of items flying around? Well, Mario Kart DS went ahead and completely ruined it. Racing is much slower, the items aren't nearly as frantic, and there's only 5 laps. All of the magic from the original was stripped out, and it's one of the worst retro tracks of all time. 31, Mario Circuit 1, a remake of the very first Mario Kart track, and it's still just as lame. Listen, I get this was on the SNES, and it makes sense for the design to be simple, but when we're comparing every single track in the game, this one is extremely forgettable and bare bones. 30, Figure 8 Circuit. Well, they definitely weren't lying in the title. Just like before, it's a beginner track, so there's barely anything noteworthy to talk about. I find this slightly more fun than Mario Circuit 1, but not by much. 29, KOOPA Beach 2, also known as the winner for World's Smallest Beach. Seriously though, this track is tiny, and all you have to do is drive around in a circle 3 times, then the race is over. The only kind of interesting part is the stretch of water where there's some cheeps and deep holes of water, but that's about it. 28, Choco Island 2. Again, this is another basic SNES track, but it's got some neat stuff. You drive on a road that is supposedly made out of chocolate. There's some piranha plants, giant bumps in the road, and even a huge pool of, I'm guessing, is chocolate syrup, which makes the course slightly more engaging. 27, Peach Circuit. You've got a cool looking Peach's castle in the background, and yeah, that's about it. Honestly, the only reason I have this higher than the other tracks so far is because I find the layout to be a bit more fun to race on, but it's really nothing that exciting. 26, Donut Plains 1. I don't really have much to say about this one other than the visuals look cooler and there's some small patches of dirt that'll slow you down. It's a perfectly okay track and that's that. 25, Yoshi Falls. The only thing that's really Yoshi-like about this track is the massive egg in the middle. Other than that, you've got a decent, albeit pretty generic track, though it is kind of neat how half of the road is at an angle, while the other half has a few ramps and dash panels. 24, GameCube Luigi Circuit. While not as chaotic as the Double Dash version, there's still some fun to be had. You've got a few dash panels along the side and a chain chomp, but the main thing you'll notice is that if you're going fast enough, you'll be able to drive past racers going in the opposite direction. The only reason this track isn't higher is because it's not nearly as fast-paced as the original, but it's fine for what it is. 23, Moo Moo Farm. Still not as good as Moo Moo Meadows, even though that track didn't exist yet, but still good. You drive through a small farm with some chirpy music playing in the background. The only real obstacle you'll encounter are these Monimoles popping out of the ground, but aside from that, this is a very simple yet surprisingly enjoyable ride. 22, Banshee Boardwalk. I stand by my statement of this being the most forgettable track from the N64, but at least it's not completely boring. This is basically a 3D version of the Ghost Valley tracks from Super Mario Kart, but one thing that helps it stand out is this small haunted house with bats swooping by, and I also love this giant cheep chomp that comes flying out of the water. There's no reason for it at all, but it's a cute detail. 21. GBA Luigi Circuit. I've just realized now that this is one of like 2 tracks in the franchise when it's raining outside. The rain effect looks much better than it did in Super Circuit, and there's puddles on the ground that'll slip you up. Maybe I'm letting my Luigi bias get the best of me, but I have a weird fondness for this track, and it's pretty fun. 20. FRAPPE SNOWLAND. If I ever visit the North Pole, I'd imagine it looks something like this. You drive on a track with snow all around you. There's some snowmen, this small area with giant walls surrounding you, and I like these giant snow statues of Mario and Luigi. And that's about it, really. Kind of like Moo Moo Farm, there's not a whole lot that happens, but it's just very pleasant to race on. 19. Desert Hills. It's a desert with hills, so let's call it Desert Hills. There's also a few Pokies wandering around, and even the angry sun from Super Mario Bros. 3 gets in on the action by spitting fireballs onto the track. As someone who doesn't really like desert tracks, I can still squeeze some fun out of this one. It's nothing incredible, but it's fine. 18. Sky Garden. Even though I didn't grow up with Super Circuit, I still feel a weird sense of nostalgia for this one. The unique visuals, the bopping music, and the cool track design all add up to a course that, in my opinion, still holds up with the newer 3D tracks. It has this very peaceful yet energetic feel to it, which I really like. 17. Bowser Castle 2. Some of you may think that Sky Garden deserves to be above this one, but I find Bowser Castle 2 to be a bit more fun. The visuals give off a more epic feeling, there's more obstacles like thwomps and fireballs, and I love the many ramps and dash panels scattered around to make you go faster. It makes it so there's more strategy on how to win, and it's an overall more engaging experience. 16. Choco Mountain. If this is actually a mountain made out of chocolate, then no fair, I want to visit. You cruise through a path carved into the mountain, so there's tons of steep walls covering the whole track. Well, aside from this section, there's a massive pit of water and boulders falling from the sky you need to watch out for. I don't know why, but I really enjoy this track, and it's not nearly as difficult as the original, so that's a plus. 15. Mario Circuit. For a long time, I didn't really care for this version of Mario Circuit, but after replaying it, it's actually really good. It's definitely the longest and waviest Mario Circuit in the series, and you've got obstacles like Goombas and fire-spitting piranha plants. You've also got some cool visuals like this pipe tunnel and Peach's castle in the background, but other than that, it's just a feel-good track that's very enjoyable to go through. 14. Mushroom Bridge. There are many tracks out there where you have to drive on a road with other cars, and this is still one of the coolest. The cars aren't hard to avoid, but they do add some tension to races, which is much appreciated. This remake does remove some things like the pathway along the street and being able to drive up the side of the bridge, but these are very minor differences. This is still a solid track that's a lot of fun to replay. 13. Shroom Ridge. Aside from being one of the most forgettable tracks of all time, I will admit it can actually be very enjoyable. It's similar to Mushroom Bridge since there's a bunch of cars driving around, but not only is the track a lot longer than that one, but it's much more wavy, and there's a few places where you can fall off the edge if you're not careful. Like I said, this track is incredibly forgettable, but I can at least appreciate how fun it is when you're actually racing on it. 12. Cheep Beach. Literally everything about this course screams vacation. You'll start off by passing some beach houses, but then you'll immediately zoom onto the beach portion of the track where there's some ramps, water that moves up and down, and some enemies like Cheeps and Sidesteppers. And finally, you'll venture through a small forest section leading back to the start. This track blends all of these locations together perfectly, making for a pretty varied race. 11. Peach Gardens. I'm not really into gardening myself, but I can definitely get a kick out of this track. As you might have guessed, you're driving through a giant garden, so you'll see many patches of flowers and even some grass statues of the Mario characters. However, you'll have to keep an eye out for the chain chomps roaming around and even some Monimoles hopping near the end. They help bring this peaceful track some much needed action, which bumps it higher on the list. 10. 10. Yoshi Circuit, and they aren't kidding. The entire track is an outline of Yoshi, but somehow it works incredibly well. The track waves around all over the place, there's a few spots to take shortcuts, and you've got some piranha plants biting down at you. Admittingly, there's not a whole lot here, but it doesn't matter when the track is pure fun. I mean, you're driving on Yoshi for God's sake. 9. Rainbow Road. Honestly, this isn't one of my favorite Rainbow Roads, but it's still very enjoyable to go through. The big thing that separates it from other Rainbow Road tracks is the loop-de-loop and corkscrew seen during the race, which is cool, I guess. Other than that, this is a very basic Rainbow Road. It's still a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, it's just missing something to truly make it great. 8. Delfino Square. Nintendo really went all out with the fan service in Mario Kart DS, and we can see that in this track. You drive through a version of Delfino Plaza from Super Mario Sunshine, hence all the Piantas cheering you on. You'll drive through this town with a splitting path, but the real show starts as you pass by the dock and marketplace, then you'll drive over this huge bridge where you can get some sweet airtime or a nice boost in speed. While the theming isn't as interesting as other tracks, it is just more fun to drive through, and it has a more creative track layout. In fact, now we're getting into the truly incredible tracks. 7. DK Pass. I can't explain it, but I've always been very fond of this track. Climbing up and down this giant mountain with huge snowballs rolling around gives off a sense of thrill, but then you've got the more calming music and design, which gives off a sense of relaxation. They both mesh together perfectly, and it results in a more peaceful track that still is a ton of fun to race through. 6. Luigi's Mansion. Remember what I said about fan service? Yeah, that also applies here. Driving through Luigi's Mansion from the GameCube with portrait ghosts hanging on the wall, speeding through a graveyard with ghosts flying around, and then there's this giant mud section that messes up your driving and has living trees walking around. This track feels like it was pulled straight out of the original game, and I love it. All we need now is a track based off Luigi's Mansion 3, then I'll be satisfied. 5. Bowser Castle. Just like Mario Circuit, I've slowly grown to appreciate what this track has to offer. The visuals and overall atmosphere are pretty typical for a Bowser Castle track, but everything else is amazing. You start off by having to avoid thwomps smashing onto the ground, then you drive on the spinning platform with fireballs shooting from the top, then you have to balance on this rotating rod, and finally, you zoom on these blocks floating on the lava before going back to the start. It's not the most inventive Bowser Castle, but it still holds up extremely well. 4. Wario Stadium. It's like Wario Stadium from Mario Kart 64, but it's actually good. And not just good, but excellent. There is so much craziness going on. You've got a ton of dash panels to speed you up, fireballs spinning around trying to burn you to a crisp, and the whole track with the visuals and music give you a feeling of zaniness that's just so awesome. 3. Airship Fortress. You know those infamous airship levels from Super Mario Bros. 3? Well, they brought them back here, but in the best way possible. You get to drive on the deck with rocky wrenches popping out of the ground, then you speed inside the airship with bars of fire to avoid, then you shoot to the top of this tower and come spiraling back to the beginning. All of these combine into one of the most intense and wonderful races I've ever gone through. 2. Tick-Tock Clock. For all the Super Mario 64 fans out there, do I have a track for you? I never thought driving in a clock could be so much fun, but this track is spectacular. You've got giant clock hands and pendulums swinging around trying to hit you, you've got rotating gears that can speed you up and slow you down, and I also really like the music. It has this unique rhythm with weird sounds, but it works perfectly with this track. Tick-Tock Clock is a phenomenal track, but I think you all know what the real number 1 is. 1. Waluigi Pinball. Over a decade and a half later, and Waluigi Pinball is still an absolute masterpiece. The track features all sorts of crazy twists and turns, there's giant pinballs rolling around trying to crush you, and then you've got this section where you're on the pinball table itself with bumpers and even more pinballs, and on top of that, the course looks absolutely dazzling with the neon imagery, the music slaps so freaking hard, good, and even smaller things like the custom sound effects help give this track so much personality. Waluigi Pinball is still one of the greatest tracks in Mario Kart history, and is the best track from Mario Kart DS. And before we wrap up, we still have to cover the battle tracks, and Mario Kart DS has one of the best selection of battle tracks in the series, so let's go over them real quick. 6. Palm Shore. You drive on an island in the middle of the ocean, and the water will rise and fall as you battle. I don't really like the rising water since it tends to slow down the action, but I still have fun here. 5. Tart Top. I can only dream of seeing a strawberry shortcake this ginormous. The whole map is just a giant bowl with a bump in the middle. My only complaint is that the only way to get item boxes is by going up the middle, but other than that, it's pretty good. 4. Nintendo DS. I wish Nintendo would make maps like this more often. You literally drive on a Nintendo DS. What more could you ask for? There's not a whole lot that happens, but I can't help but love it. 3. Twilight House. I love how there's so many rooms to drive through, and you've even got some rocky wrenches scattered around as well. You can also drive on the outside of the mansion, but you have to be careful since there's no guardrails. 2. Pipe Plaza. If you haven't watched my Double Dash video yet, this is my favorite map from that game. Tons of room to drive around, a couple layers to go up and down, pipes that randomly throw you into different parts of the map. Like, come on, this is just great. 1. Block Fort. Many people consider this to be the best battle map of all time, and I can totally see why. There's several paths to drive on, multiple levels allowing for more strategy, and there's no intrusive gimmicks to ruin the fun. Like I said before, this is truly the perfect battle stage for any Mario Kart. Mario Kart DS may not have been my first Mario Kart experience, but I still played this game a lot growing up, and I felt so much nostalgia playing this for this video. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, then make sure to give it a like, and if you have a favorite track from this game, let me know down in the comments below. Also, subscribe to my channel with notifications on so you'll know when I post more videos like this. Have a great day, stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one.